welcome. Thanks for coming out on this Thursday evening. I'll start with, so I have a slideshow going. We're going to talk about medicinal trees, 5 medicinal tree species of northern Minnesota. I'll kind of do a little intro about myself, my work. Maybe we can just go kind of quickly through the class. I'd just love to know your name and if you have, I guess why you felt called to take this, if you have any experience with herbal medicine or ecology or foraging or whatever. I would love to know. So my name is Emma. Boom. That's a picture of me with my little baby Naya, who's 15 months. Some of you had the pleasure of meeting her earlier. I also have a husband, but he's not in the picture. So I live in Duluth. I'm an herbalist, an educator, and a radical birth keeper. So as an herbalist, I offer kind of holistic wellness sessions for people. As an educator, I do like to do lots of live classes kind of at various venues throughout the city and do some kind of longer online courses. And then as a radical birth keeper, I attend home births and provide postpartum care and kind of holistic support, mother-centered care for women, moving through that transition. And a lot of my work, I guess, and my purpose, my goal centers around reclaiming and remembering the role of the community wise woman, who is a presence that's in service to the healing of community members and the land, and kind of reweaving our relationship together. So thank you for being here. Welcome. So yeah, one of the kind of core reasons I was excited about teaching this is I really love this land and I love this bioregion, and we're so, even with the challenging weather and all that, we're so lucky. There's so much abundance and biodiversity in this space. So I love it, and I kind of talk about it all the time. So thanks for coming. Little intro. Tree medicines are also, an herbal medicine, but a kind of a subsect that I really love because they're generally quite easy to identify once you learn, and just by their very nature really abundant. Often branches are falling in windstorms, and there's very little kind of chance to overharvest or damage stands. And a lot of people are also like, wait, didn't conceive of maybe trees could be used medicinally. We think of maybe herbaceous herbs, but tonight we're going to talk about 5 medicinal trees of this bioregion, and it was hard. There's a lot, and we'll kind of have some honorable mentions at the end. There's many medicinal trees, but I tried to focus on 5. So first one, birch, the beautiful birch tree. So there are 5 species native to Minnesota, right? So abundant where we are. It's really ubiquitous all across Minnesota, and birch is kind of a core keystone species in the boreal forest. And we're right kind of at the southern edge of the boreal forest here in Duluth. So birch is really resilient, able to grow in a ton of different conditions, and just gorgeous, beautiful being. So there's lots of different parts that we can use for all the trees. So kind of how I'm structuring this is we'll touch on each of the 5 trees, and I will have sections. You'll see it'll be repeated. We're going to kind of talk about the parts used. We're going to talk a bit about the medicine ways, and it's hard to condense the medicinal, properties of plants, but I often broke it up into kind of body systems. And then we'll also talk about if there are any contraindications. We'll talk about kind of applications, literally how can we turn this into medicine? What are the kind of most effective, tasty, useful forms? We'll talk a little bit about if there's any interesting folklore or kind of plant spirit medicine aspects. And then a bit about if there are any sort of other uses, utilitarian, ecological, whatever. So birch is an incredibly useful, beautiful tree, right? So many parts of the birch are used and have been really appreciated and respected and just highly used by every culture that had access to birch trees. So kind of in a medicinal context, sap, leaves, kind of the growing tips, buds and twig tips, and then the inner bark. And tell me if I'm going too fast, and also this will be probably mostly kind of lecture style, but I really want, if you have any questions, I'd just raise your hand or speak it out, it's not going to be like an interruption at all. And I'll make space for that too. But so birch, one of the core, I guess if I were to describe the medicine of this tree, is it's incredibly helpful at supporting our pathways of elimination. So we have many of those in our body. Cleansing, detoxification. So we have our colon, we have our kidneys and urinary system, we have our lymphatic system, our gallbladder and liver, we have our skin, right? There's so many ways that our bodies are releasing metabolic waste products. And birch is just incredible at supporting really all of these. So it is an herbal alterative, which is, I have a cool definition for that. So alteratives are, this is an herbal term that describes a plant that supports our body's capacity to both absorb nutrition and properly eliminate waste. So ultimately, lots of alteratives are cleansing, and they're also really kind of restorative to the metabolism, and on a body-wide scale, but also like on a cellular scale. So our cellular metabolism really is like the foundation of our well-being and our vitality. And alteratives are really cool because, you know, they're different than like an herbal laxative that supports the movement of our bowels. Alteratives kind of work in ways that are like kind of like unknown or mysterious, or like science is like, we don't really know, but we see that it is cleansing the blood or supporting the elimination of waste through many channels. Like it's which I think is really cool. There's like some sort of just magical reminding, the energy of these plants remind our bodies how to have a really thriving metabolism. So young leaf, buds, twig tips, sap are kind of going to be the parts that we lean on for this. They carry a lot of fresh energy, moving energy. The sap is a really traditional spring tonic amongst all the indigenous peoples that lived around birch trees. It's really full of minerals and nutrients and just super cleansing. Do you have questions yet? It doesn't have a ton, the sap doesn't have a ton of taste. It's like mostly water, and then there's totally incredible vitamins and minerals and a little bit of sugar in there, a really small amount of sugar. No, not at all. It's like super lightly flavored water, like probably the original like bubbly water kind of thing with like the faintest little taste in there.
Someone was selling a sap as an alternative to maple syrup, as a birch syrup at one of the festivals last year, and I got some. Would it carry any of the cleansing, or is it boiled out to such a degree?
It's still incredibly mineral rich. Okay. Yeah, it's like, I mean, real maple syrup, real birch syrup are extremely mineral rich. Yes. They're medicinal for sure, even with the high sugar content. But yeah, you can boil it down, and I would say it's still medicinal. It's just nutritive. It's really nourishing and yummy. I've had that too. I think there's a woman at the farmer's market here that sells little jars. Yeah, so good. Great. So cleansing our inner waters, like the medicinal qualities of birch, and we'll kind of see later some of the like spiritual, energetic, like ritual ways, the ways it's been used in folk medicine really aligns with these physical medicinal actions. It's really good at cleaning out old stuff, whether that's waste products, whether that's stuck emotional energy, whether it's kind of whatever, right? A lot of the time when we're stuck, there's stuck stuff happening, our eliminative organs really feel that. Can be energy boosting. All right, urinary, kidney, lymphatic system, all of those are obviously organ systems that really have an intimate relationship with the balance of fluid in our body, whether that's blood, lymphatic fluid, interstitial fluid, obviously urine, sweat, like all of that stuff. Actually, I'm gonna go back, sorry y'all. And talk a tiny bit more about the kind of urinary kidney support. Kind of for this system, we wanna lean on the young leaves. So that's an incredibly helpful non-irritating diuretic. So that's helpful if you tend to hold on to water or struggle with like edema or swelling in the extremities. Really going to increase kind of the output of our urinary system and is really strengthening to the kidneys. So if you kind of know someone that's a body system that tends to struggle for them, the young leaves are really lovely. You can dry them as a tea, kind of have them year round. Can be used for like dissolving kidney stones, can be an ally for gout, all of that stuff that relies on the kidneys. Let's see, lymphatic system, again, really cleansing, really moving. It's gonna be an anti-tumor, anti-cancer, right? It's supporting our resistance, right? When our inner waters are clean for the most part, or like well tended to, we're a lot more resistant to inflammation, infection, lethargy, fatigue, all of that stuff. And there's some cool like ethnobotanical usages. So this is like indigenous First Nations people uses. They really leaned on the young leaf and kind of the bud and twig tips in the spring, and the sap as well as spring tonics for, I think we can really relate to this, often living in the north in Minnesota, and birch predominantly lives in really cold climates, so it lives all around kind of the boreal, like literally the northern part of the globe. But when we feel really like worn down, fatigued, tired, like just chilled to the bone, it's such a good late winter, early spring tonic, right? When the young leaves are coming out. And often it's cold here still, it's windy, it's damp, it's muddy. Great time to lean on that. Right now. Yeah, I don't think they're coming out yet. I've seen some ramps coming up, but I haven't seen many other tree leaves popping out yet. But yes, definitely, we're feeling it. So birch has a long history of use for the integumentary and musculoskeletal system, and integumentary is basically like our skin, hair, nails, that system. It's incredibly restorative and strengthening, particularly kind of the older leaves for the hair. It's indicated for hair loss, thinning hair, dry, brittle hair, dry skin, itchy skin. It's really like strengthening to the skin, particularly for elders if their kind of skin is getting thin and prone to injury. I would lean on birch for any skin issue, like acne, eczema, psoriasis, tendency towards like boils, or, kind of frequent staph infections or rashes, or really like any kind of thing in that realm. And one of the cool things about birch is its bark looks like skin, like lots of different colors of skin. So we have that kind of really pale white outer bark, and the more you pull those layers off and get down to kind of more the inner bark, it transforms from white into like a super, super dark copper color, which is really beautiful. And obviously doesn't cover all the skin colors of humans, but it's kind of a signature of the tree, right? It has this really beautiful skin and supports our skin health. And it's also a really traditional herb to use in bathing, in the sauna, or kind of sweat bathing traditions. It was used in sweat lodge and was used all in Scandinavia. The vitas, yeah, so the bundle of fresh birch, super healthy for the skin, opens the pores, moves lymphatic system, smells really beautiful, has a bunch of kind of like resiny aromatic compounds that are just really good for opening the lungs and cleansing the skin. And you could do a strong tea as a face wash. Again, just supports beauty. It's a tree. We'll talk about it kind of more in the folklore, but it's a tree really associated like with the feminine and with the goddess, and really supports lustrous hair, shining eyes, really healthy skin, kind of a glowing vitality skin. Let's see. You can use it for fungal things too. Cradle cap. Yeah, lots of ways to use it in the sauna. Yeah, and some of its support for the musculoskeletal system is it's also, to a lesser degree, kind of the paper birch, but it's contains salicylates, which are pain-relieving compounds. That's like salicylic acid is in aspirin, and that was initially kind of synthesized from a plant. Most people say willow, but so it's pain-relieving, really helpful for supporting our connective tissue. Similar to how it supports the integrity of our skin and our hair, it's supporting our bones and our connective tissue. When we bathe in it, when we use it in the sauna, and when we kind of regularly ingest it. Yeah, let's see what else about that.
So is there a difference between like if you were trying to do a birch tea, would that be, if you wanted the hair, skin, bones, but you also wanted the, hang on, let me get the word, alternate. Would it be different?
No, it would pretty much be the same. Yeah,
So
and
you could drink the same tea for both?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and yeah, I didn't want to have too much going on in the slideshow, but we'll talk about it a little more too, kind of some of the applications that make the most sense. For the most part, most things, like you could drink a tea of any of the herbs and receive many of the benefits. Like it's going to act on those things. For some things, like if you're really trying to support hair growth, skin restoration, I would say use it internally and externally. Be doing washes, baths, etc. And another thing too is people use it traditionally in the sauna and in bathing. Supports just the strength of connective tissue, but is also a really traditional herb for like arthritic pain, rheumatism, just like joint pain, joint swelling. And there's kind of a through line connecting all of that stuff, right? A lot of the time, there's lots of reasons, but a weakness in the kidney's filtration system can lead to crystals building up in our joints, causing inflammation and pain. So there's like an interesting through line of like, oh, birch is holding some sort of wisdom and capacity to work with that, right? Helping us release some of that, increase the efficiency of our ability to release that, and actually physically tending to the inflamed, painful joints, tissues. Yeah, speeds the healing of broken bones. And then, microbiome support. So it's also super restorative to our, particularly like our gut microbiome and the microbiome of our sort of genitourinary system. So there's a microbiome in our bladder and in our, particularly for women, but in our vagina. So those are all often really connected, but birch just offers great support. It's really tightened, like it can be used for leaky gut, for kind of a whole range, especially part of a formula, candida, H. pylori, like any sort of microbial overgrowth. I would consider birch a cool part of a formula. And tonify. Yeah, I mean, honestly, just gut inflammation, lack of appetite, ulcers, gas, kind of lots of digestive imbalances would be benefited. It really strengthens the small intestine. It can kind of move gallbladder and liver stagnation. And yeah, again, this is kind of connected to its use in the kidneys and urinary system, but can be really helpful for chronic or acute, but kind of often sort of a repeating, hard to kick, like a UTI or chronic cystitis. Usually points to something kind of being up with that microbiome, the beings that live in our bladder. Yeah, are there questions about that? Anything? I know it's kind of a lot. Cool. So there really are very few contraindications. Really just use care if you're on diuretic drugs, pharmaceuticals, because it's a diuretic. So that could, compound in a way. That's not ideal. So tons of different ways to make medicine with this tree, right? A tincture, an elixir is really just a tincture with honey. I make a lot of elixirs. I feel like they age really well, and it's often enjoyable to have a little sweetness in there. It kind of just makes it easier to take, easier to give it to people. And honey, especially raw honey, is medicinal in its own right too. So infusion, decoction. An infusion is just putting hot water on some herbs. A decoction is your kind of simmering herbs. A syrup, that's where you're making a strong tea and adding honey. Bath, rinse, compress. Those are kind of all ways to sort of externally lean on this medicine. You could do an infused oil. You can drink the sap. You can ferment the sap. There's lots of traditional kind of really low alcoholic content beverages made with birch sap. You can infuse vinegar, flower essence. You can burn the leaves. You can use it in the sauna. You can make the vitas. So there's tons of stuff. And yeah, actually we'll get there. Yeah, harvesting. So some kind of thoughts and tips about harvesting. Sap. Actually, we haven't done it this year as my family, so I don't know. I do know that it runs later than maple sap. It does not run at the same time as maple sap. It runs a bit later. The sap is generally best used fresh. It's a spring tonic. It's available now. Its medicine is now. You could, freeze it or can it or something too. The leaf, so for internal use, we want them kind of younger. So I would say spring and early summer. If you're planning on using them for a hair rinse or a bath, sort of external use, we can gather them later into the summer. Buds and twig tips, what would be kind of ideal is making a tincture or an elixir or something from kind of the growing branch tips that have twig tips, buds, and little baby leaves on there. You're kind of weaving all of that together. Best harvested, right before they leaf out or when the leaves are just emerging, right? There's still a lot of energy in that part of the plant, which is what we want. And the inner bark, I don't necessarily use this as much. I think we're really getting a lot of that same medicine if we're harvesting the twig tips. But again, early spring when there's, the energy is in the bark because it's either moving up the tree or you could do in the fall when it's moving down. And then the outer bark isn't necessarily medicinal, but is used for a ton of beautiful crafts. Like you can make baskets and containers. And if you were excited about that, in mid-June, sometimes July, it just like peels off. Not necessarily medicinal, but a little bit about the folklore. We talked about this a little bit, right? This is just such a loved, cherished tree in all northern cultures. Scandinavian, Celtic, Russian, northern China, like tons of places. Indigenous here, North America. Really, again, a tree associated with the goddess. So there's lots of folkloric uses and connections to love and beauty and fertility and sort of marriage rites and sexuality and like spring, rising, fertile energy. It's also used to protect women kind of through the birth portal. It's also used in kind of death ceremonies, like the Ojibwa would wrap their dead in birch bark to kind of protect them through the liminal transition. Scottish and Irish folks did a lot of similar things. They would often make hats out of birch bark. It's also a shamanic world tree, so it has a lot of associations with spiritual practitioners, and has some powers to help us see clearly, see the unseen. Divination is like seeing the invisible, receiving information from the invisible world. Quite a powerful, beautiful tree. I love birch so much. And some kind of other things. The inner bark is indeed edible. It's kind of like a famine food, but there's totally sugars and stuff in it. I saw a really cool recipe that was from Finland that was like there was a component of a sort of rustic bread that was birch bark. So you can add a lot of tree bark, inner tree bark can be dried, ground, pounded, and added in small proportions to other flours. And I think it's pretty high in protein, which is cool. So birch, incredible relationship with fire, literally the best fire starter, even if it's wet. Such a good thing to know if you're ever out in the bush. Also a source of birch tar, which is kind of a super cool like Paleolithic glue. People have used it to attach spear points. And birch, similar to alder, which we'll talk about later, but has really cool commensal relationships with microbes in the soil. So it's considered kind of it's kind of a pioneer tree. It's one of the first to come into kind of damaged landscapes, or it was the first to grow after sort of the glaciers receded, after the last glaciation, and it really is building and restoring the biome of the soil and of the earth, which is, we can kind of see with its use, microbiome support in our own body. It's really has a ton of relationships with dozens and dozens of types of different fungi, medicinal, edible, and just supports tons of other creatures. Yeah. Questions, thoughts? Who else loves birch? Yes. It's my fave. So beautiful.
I have a question about the birch.
Yeah.
So when you're harvesting some of these things, I mean, you say take the twigs and the leaves.
Mm-hmm.
So my guess is that it's not just go and just willy-nilly flip things, or
Mm-hmm.
there's a more friendly and less friendly ways to go about that.
Sure.
Are you going to talk about that a bit?
Sure, I can talk about it right now. Totally, yeah. I mean, ethical wildcrafting and foraging is a big topic, and I think that it's also pretty intuitive. Like, we can kind of be like, okay, here's a healthy looking tree. I'm not going to clip every single branch tip. I'm going to maybe take a few from this tree, move on, take a few from this tree. There's various rules. Take 1 out of 5 of a, section of plants. Trees are a little more, again, resilient, adaptable, abundant. Not that I am advocating going, being more wanton with how we harvest them, but just be thoughtful about how much you gather. As you're kind of learning and remembering how to forage and wildcraft, which is what all our ancestors did forever, there's probably going to be a process where you're learning and calibrating, like, how much do I need? Almost all forage, I did this a lot when I was first learning, is like, oh my gosh, wow, there's so much of this here, like, it's perfect. I'm gonna, get this huge basket, and then just be mindful, like, it also takes time to process and tend to that stuff. So it's really easy to be like, oh my gosh, I got so much, and then like, oh gosh, I don't have 2 hours to like sit and process this, so it's gonna go bad or rot. And that's okay, don't beat yourself up about it. Like, we're kind of like children relearning this. It's, the trees are our elders, and I hear from them often they're not mad at us, they're just actually really compassionate and loving and generous, and they understand that we're kind of fumbling towards relearning this stuff. And also just be mindful of sort of like the cleanliness of the environment, I would say, as far as you can be from roads or any source of industry or railroads or anything like that, just to reduce, I don't know, potential contaminants basically on there.
Is there a faux birch tree? Like, is there anything to look out for, or if it just fits the description, you know it's a birch?
Pretty much. I actually didn't even really include tons of, some of my other ones, there's pictures of like the leaf and the bark and all that stuff. I just feel like it's so ubiquitous. It really is pretty easy to ID birch. There's nothing like it. Sometimes there are ornamental birches from Europe that they kind of are more weeping. So they'll have branches that weep down, and they're more often like in people's yards and stuff. You can totally still use them. I feel like it's not as strong medicinally, and I don't really have experience with that one. But otherwise, super beautiful white bark, green leaves, it's birch.
So when you're like harvesting leaves, you go up and you like use a scissors to just like clip. Do you clip like per leaf, like, or do you like?
I think you could do it whatever you wanted. What I intuitively usually do is, honestly, I will saw off a like little mini branch, or a kind of lower branch, one tree, walk further away, get another one. You could clip leaf by leaf.
How do you dry it then?
You can put them in a paper bag, shake it multiple times a day. You can spread them on an old like window screen. You could put them in a dehydrator. That's one of the best ways. If you have a dehydrator, it does preserve the medicinal component. Like, it's just so much more vibrant looking. But yeah, there's tons of ways. You could even just like hang up the branches. Just you could totally hang the branch. Yeah, if you wanted totally. If you wanted the leaves, that would be great. If you want maybe bark or you have the twigs, I would recommend cutting them fresh, because most woody things get just like brittle later. So it's gonna be a lot harder to cut it. You won't be able to cut it with clippers.
And then with buds, you would just take like
The twig tips.
just like
I would literally cut the twig tips. So there's gonna be like a branch with some of the little buds and catkins hanging and probably some new leaves and twigs. I would just like cut the branch tip off, I don't know, this far. I wouldn't want it to be too thick of a branch further up, because you don't really want the like super hard wood inside. Like the heartwood is not, it's not medicinal. There's no really components in it. And then I would just cut it with, clippers, like Velcros or something. And I would you can make a tea, you can make a tincture, so you could pour some vodka on it, put a little honey in there. That's a birch twig tip elixir. Right there, let it sit for 6 weeks, boom.
So is there any disease that the birch carries that you wouldn't want to clip one tree and then go to the next one and clip from that one? Is there anything like that? And then also clipping.
Maybe.
Whenever I clip, I'll do research and they'll say something like, only cut it at an angle, don't cut it straight on.
Yeah, for sure.
Just to help minimize the.
Yeah, I feel like a good way is like, you don't want sort of the wound that you're creating, like you don't want, so if this was the twig, I would probably cut it this way or even this way, so the wound is down, versus like having maybe water just sitting on it. That's just easier to kind of breed diseases. I don't know. I do know that birch is susceptible to a lot of different diseases and blights. It's kind of a short-lived tree, just like by its nature. I personally wouldn't worry a ton about it. It just has such a strong spirit. I really think it's doing great. I think bigger picture, when we're like wanting to, tend to the conservation of a species, I don't find it as helpful to be like, this individual who's trying to interact did something wrong. It's like, okay, how about we bigger picture make it so, we're not cutting down tons of forest to develop, like just the scale is kind of different. But yeah, whatever, little political side note. But yeah. Okay. Oh gosh, okay. All right, well, birch kind of had the most, so we got this. We'll work through. Okay, so the next one is white cedar. Beautiful, beautiful. The white cedar has pretty grayish, kind of ridged, almost like stringy kind of bark. This is just another picture of the needles, and these are kind of some of the ripe, these are the female cones, or sometimes called cedar berries, but this is a pretty distinct tree. I'll go back, like they have kind of flattened needles. Nothing else around here has this. All the others, the spruce, the fir, the pine, have like straight up needles, like a pine needle. But cedar is in a kind of different family, and it has these flattened needles. So Thuja occidentalis, cedar is also called the tree of life, or the kind of Ojibwa Anishinaabe, they call this tree our grandmother cedar, which is really beautiful. Yeah, it grows all across northern Minnesota and really tends to like water, moist ground. And we're mostly using the leaf. So those are kind of the flattened, I guess, needles, really, that I just showed you. So cedar is really, I mean, also like white pine, like a lot of the conifers, is really aromatic. So it's really full of these really beautiful aromatic compounds, and kind of across the board, herbs, plants, when there's some degree of aromatic element, it's usually connected to like a high essential oil content, and essential oils are extremely potent and tend to be antimicrobial, antiseptic, antibacterial, antifungal. Like they're really, in a lot of ways, the plant people's like response to microbes. So bacteria, fungi, whatever pathogens. So they're very antiseptic. So cedar has a strong affinity for the lungs. And if we wanted to work with it in that way, I would say a tea, doing like a tea and inhaling the steam. Steam inhalation is great. Or an elixir, something that's working with the plant fresh and really keeping a lot of its vitality, really. So stimulates the lungs, really helpful for, especially if there's like a lot of mucus, sort of copious mucus, it's stuck, where I would look to cedar if we're consistently getting upper respiratory infections or lower respiratory infections. They're often descending into the lungs. There's a like stuck, lingering crud in the lungs, or just like an infection that's really hard to kind of kick. So we'll kind of talk a little bit about it more too, but it's not only working on the lungs, it's actually profoundly stimulating to the immune system. It increases phagocytosis, so that's literally like our white blood cells eating invaders basically in our body. So that's a really helpful thing. Cedar is great for like sore throat, swollen tonsils, could be helpful for if we have like a sinus infection, a laryngitis, bronchitis, kind of any of the like, again, upper respiratory infections, particularly if there's some degree of mucus there, which usually there are. Yeah.
Do you think this is something that you could make like a cleaning solution out of even?
Totally.
The antibacterial properties?
Heck yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, totally. We'll talk about it a bit later, but like it is very purifying, like energetically, physically. It's very antifungal, antiviral, antibacterial, all of that. And it is a potent remedy, so we'll talk about it later, but it's a strong plant. So can be an ally for kind of chronic, again, similar to the respiratory system, but like a chronic gut infection, has an affinity for things like giardia or like parasites or amoebic infestations, which are really hard historically to get rid of. yeah, incredible, stimulates immunity. So would be one I would lean on if there's like an acute infection, or again, kind of our immune system is maybe not functioning, it's hypofunctioning is kind of what I would say, so not functioning enough, tending to get sick often. Often there's, yeah, that again, not even just respiratory, like right, chronic and acute infections, like I say, urinary, digestive, reproductive system, that could be chronic yeast infections, bacterial vaginosis, that could be chronic UTIs, cystitis, digestive infections, candida. It's incredibly antifungal. Yeah, super useful ally to have around, and grows really abundantly, and is just strong medicine. So just kind of a small note about dosage, like if I were using cedar, probably part of a formula, I would say, to address an acute infection, I would do a larger dose, like really consistently. If I was maybe treating sort of a subacute chronic, like it just keeps lingering, kind of background, like simmering, I would do small kind of daily doses over time. The small daily doses are gonna be like boosting our immune system longer term. Does that make sense?
And for a small daily dose, what do you mean by that?
Like 3 to 5 drops of a tincture, like a small dose. Yeah, in water, maybe just be like, I'm doing this up in the morning or at night. Yeah, you could I like to dose tinctures in a little bit of water. I think it's just slightly nicer than just straight up alcohol.
Yeah. Yeah. B-ball. Someone hit me with a tincture of that.
Ooh, it's potent.
Yeah, I felt that for a while.
It's really bitter and kind of like burning.
Yeah, that was something else.
When you're making tinctures,
Mm-hmm.
are you just doing enough of the, I don't know what you would call it, but enough of the like material, just to cover it? Like,
Yeah, so there's like plant material, and then menstruum is a term for any sort of solvent. So that could be wine, oil, vodka, honey, vinegar, whatever, etc. Yeah, there's kind of more in there, but generally fresh plants, yeah, you would want to cover it by maybe an inch or 2. So, here's a jar 3/4 full of chopped up fresh cedar leaf. I would cover it by like an inch or something. If you're using
the dry version,
much less. So much less of the plant material.
right? And
Yeah.
then when you're like making just a cup of tea, like would you use maybe just like a tablespoon of that plant?
Yeah,
Okay.
dried. Totally. Yep. Yeah, and that's kind of whatever, rough, but I'm a folk herbalist, so. Oh wait, I'm sorry, we didn't really, we did actually, okay, great. Yeah, cedar is a powerful herb, so partially that's because of that really high kind of essential oil content. It contains some other things that are really strong, other alkaloids and compounds and stuff. So it's so high in essential oils that I would just use care, really, or if you have overt kidney disease, I would avoid it, or if your kidneys are just sensitive, struggling, going through some stuff, whatever, I would just be thoughtful and wary. I personally wouldn't say, no, you can never use it in pregnancy. I would say work with an experienced herbalist. Ideally, you have a relationship with that plant ahead of time. And yeah, not for long-term use. It's potent. So lots of different lovely ways. We kind of talked about a lot of these things already. It's really beautiful to burn. I actually didn't put this on here, but it's a beautiful kind of bioregional incense. So it's really purifying, energetically, really great alternative to kind of white sage, which is not native and just very at risk. So harvesting, pretty resilient. I mean, like we can really honestly harvest conifers all year round. That's one of the cool things, is like in the middle of the winter, it's one of the plant medicines that's still available. Midsummer, if you're like, I want this to be the most potent, I'm gonna make a tincture maybe at this point to last through the year. Midsummer, right when there's the most sort of heat in our world, it's like literally bringing the essential oils like out or higher. I don't know how to describe that, but yeah, and a similar thing, I would probably just cut like a twig tip off. You can dry it, you can use it fresh. Lots of different ways. You could make it in a little bundle to burn. It's great in the sauna. Yeah, questions? Sorry, it's a lot of info, y'all. Okay, cedar, beautiful, amazing cedar. Yeah, highly revered by indigenous peoples. Was just an extremely beloved tree. Our grandmother cedar is like literally the name, which I love. There's just such love and just kinship there. It has tons of powers, esoteric spiritual powers, and was, yeah, just an integral part of ceremonial life. So it was used in sweat lodge, sauna, ritual bathing, and just kind of to honor big transitions and provide protection as the seasons moved and sort of as humans move through various seasons in their lives. Yeah, and I work with this tree in that way too. Very kind of compassionate, protective energy, spirit. Yeah, and then the wood's incredible. So very resistant to kind of rot, decay, aromatic, repels insects, cedar chests, all of that stuff. And is beautiful and local to us. Okay, next tree, alder. I know, 90 minutes are hard. Do you have questions? Okay. All right, alder is really beautiful. It's in the same family as birch, so the Betulinaceae family. This is, yeah, leaves. These are kind of the immature cones. So that's the female part. These are the kind of opened cones. These persist on the tree like all year. So this is totally a winter ID thing. If you see a shrubby, alders are basically shrubs. They're kind of often in swamps. There's alder swamps, alder thickets. This is really a good ID thing in the winter. That nothing else has those cute little cones. And then, yeah, these are the catkins kind of in spring. These will open and kind of get more dangly, and that's where the pollen's released. So that's kind of the male part of the plant.
Okay.
And then what makes so the other things were the cones, those become what?
The male part.
They kind of stretch out and release pollen.
Oh,
And then the pollen lands inside the cones, and then the seeds are fertilized and all of it. Yep, some two species kind of native here.
Okay.
Speckled alder is a lot more common. It's just super, super abundant. It likes wet ground. So again, it's like a shrubby, maybe at most 10 feet high or something. I feel like I've seen some that maybe got up to the ceiling in here. So kind of just shrubby, often lots of trunks, lots of kind of big branches, bog, swamps, all the wet zones.
Okay.
And it's kind of similar to birch in terms of the parts that we use. So my favorite medicine is, again, those kind of growing branch tips that are going to contain a little bit of leaf. They're going to contain the little catkins and the cones and kind of the tips of the twigs. They're really beautiful and like incredibly aromatic. I'm kicking myself because I have an elixir of it, and it's just like crazy. It's so sweet. Like it almost tastes like roses and like apples, like baked apples, and it's really cool. And it's fun because it's so abundant. So also similar to birch, it has a lot of kind of similar medicinal qualities. Like it's, again, an alterative. This is kind of part of the doctrine of signatures I was talking about earlier, right? We see birch has this beautiful bark and is used to beautify our bark, our skin. They literally are like holding the medicine and the wisdom of that. So it's like swamp medicine, river medicine. They help our bodies tend to our inner waters. So again, blood, lymph, all of that stuff. And I feel like that's just a cool way to instead of being like, okay, I have to memorize this list of like uses or things that it's for, kind of bigger picture, like, oh, this tree has the ability and like the wisdom to know how to live in stagnant water and still create new life and bring in nutrition and process waste. So I think that's hard. That's cool. I'm glad they know how to do that. They help our bodies do that too. Yeah, super helpful for stagnant lymph, for swollen glands. Again, kind of hypoimmunity, that's like tending to get sick often, kind of chronic sore throat. If people feel stagnant, lethargic, that can be a lot of things, but can be connected to sort of stagnant lymph. And just a little note, lymph doesn't have, like our heart pumps blood through our body, but the lymphatic system doesn't have a pump. It requires our movement. So it's all good.
Can you talk again a little bit about what herbs are used?
Yeah, we can go back. Yeah, it's super similar to the birch. Leaves, the leaves are kind of specific for external use. We'll talk about that in a minute, but they're really just pain relieving and anti-inflammatory. You can make a salve or like in the field if you needed that for wounds, anything like that. And then kind of the growing tips. So like the twig tips that have the catkins and cones on there. That's literally just like the growing tips. In the spring, again, similar with birch, that's when the energy's there. There's a cool quote from an old herbal. Alder is resorted to by the country people in nearly all obstinate chronic diseases of the skin or glandular system. So I use alder in any formula, again, similar to birch, anything with the skin. Acne, eczema, psoriasis, tendency to boils, like whatever, chronic rashes, itching, inflammation, like whatever, anything. The leaves, and you could totally throw in some of the twig tips too, but the leaves make a really beautiful anti-inflammatory, pain-relieving, healing salve. So they really get to muscle pain, joint pain, of course are gonna be helpful for healing cuts, scrapes, wound, like skin stuff, but I find that they get deeper too, which is really nice for, rheumatism, joint pain, even nerve pain. I've seen pretty good success, especially combining alder with some other stuff for kind of neuralgias and things like that, nerve pains. Let's see what else. Oh yeah, I've using alder internally and externally seen some really good success with even things like staph infections or MRSA, like kind of more serious skin stuff. Alder's extremely anti-infective. Like it's in all of my formulas for infection, partly because it's just so good at supporting our lymph, which we need to support when we're fighting an infection, because as our immune system's sort of killing all the bad bacteria, the bodies of that bacteria have to be ushered out of our body. That's like metabolic waste. Yeah, so it's very important. Alder's this really aromatic, kind of has some bitter notes. It's really lovely for the digestive system, particularly when there's like lack of appetite or like food feels really heavy or there's like heavy, sluggish digestion, or some degree of like malnutrition, or like, which we maybe don't see or we don't think we see as much kind of in the modern world, but in fact there are a lot of people who may be eating plenty but not actually be nourished.
Right.
That's actually really common in our current culture, sadly. So yeah, alder's incredible for tonifying our digestive tract and really in that alterative way, really helping us with our metabolism and our digestion. Let's see if I forgot anything there. Oh yeah, leaky gut. Yeah, again, heavy, feeling sleepy after meals. It's kind of a good indication for alder medicine. Yeah, amazing for the immune system. Like I said, immune supportive and anti all the things. It's really cool. There have been some studies that show it's effective against gram-positive and gram-negative bacteria, which is cool. I'm not going to go into that if you don't know what it is. Sorry, but we're running out of time. But yeah, just different types of bacteria and lots of, antibiotics. Often only pharmaceutical antibiotics can only address usually one or the other. So that's kind of cool. Yeah, again, I would throw alder at really any infection, UTI, and like mouth infections, tooth infections, ear infections, any upper respiratory, any bladder, any skin infection, a yeast infection, whatever, anything. I really, truly would. I've seen a lot of great stuff. I've seen some people have success resolving allergies, seasonal allergies over time. And I think that's kind of connected to its lymphatic detoxification support. So no contraindications. The only note is that for the most part, we kind of use alcohol-based extractions or oil because if we're just like boiling the parts of the plant, there's tons of tannins. So it can be actually really hard on your digestive, like your gut, basically. And we don't see that really at all with the tincture or the elixir.
What does the water do to bring out the tannins?
Yeah, tannins are extremely water soluble.
Okay, so
Yeah,
that's it.
whereas alcohol isn't really.
Okay,
So that's pretty
like
much it.
You're drinking the alcohol and leaving the material behind. You're not taking the tannins.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
When you're doing like a bath with this, like is that something that you would like put a tincture into the bath, or would it just be?
If you're using it externally, you can totally do water-based preparations.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Because our skin, actually tannins are really healing to our skin. They are, tightening, they increase integrity, they heal wounds, they're pain relieving, all that stuff. So we would want it there, but not in our gut.
Would
Yeah.
you want the leaves to be like dry before using it?
Yeah, so the leaves are kind of specific just for infused oil or like a poultice in the field. They're really cooling and soothing. Those, honestly, I would mostly do fresh. I would do either straight up you are like using fresh alder leaves, or you're making an infused oil and then making a salve from that with the fresh leaves. Everything else would be the twig tips, the catkins. If you were gathering them later in the season for some reason, which I would only recommend for external use, you could have leaves in there too, of course, it'd be fine. But yeah. Okay. Lots of different beautiful ways, lots of similar stuff. You can make wine out of the leaves. It's really cool. It tastes like green apples. Very similar, again, super similar to birch here, similar harvesting components. The one super important note is that we are not using, except for leaves, and those are only externally, we're not using anything fresh. The tannin, it's just the compounds are really intense. It's always used recently dried. So just throw it in a dehydrator. You could throw it in the oven. You could let it dry for whatever, a week or something before you make tincture, elixir, use it for bath, etc. And yeah, alder's cool. Has lots of associations with the other world, fairies, death, battle, all throughout Europe. It's a cool tree. Lots of incredible other uses. It's a good wood for smoking. There's some edibility. It's pretty intense. I wouldn't probably, in a survival situation I would, but it's pretty bitter. Similar to birch, it improves soil health. You can make baskets, and it's a pretty solid wood as well. And if people are nervous about, like, I can also send the PowerPoint to people if you want to share your email after, so you're not like, oh my gosh. Okay, yeah. All right, white pine. And we only have like 15, 20 minutes. But beautiful white pine. When they're older, when they're older, they have pretty ridged, kind of gray bark, soft, beautiful feathery leaves. Yeah, white pines are really beautiful. They have needles in bundles of 5, and the needles are super soft and feathery, which is really nice. They're very good trees to climb. They have like really nice equidistant branches. They're probably, I think they're the tallest tree in our region. They used to be a lot more abundant, but it was really heavily logged, sadly. But yeah, they're coming back. So we can use a lot of parts of the tree, probably really mostly going to focus on the needles. And again, a pattern similar to alder, similar to birch. Harvest, I really almost always use the twig tips. So there's like the bundles of needles, and I take a little bit of twig too, because also the inner bark and outer bark are medicinal. So we're kind of weaving all of it in there versus like, I'm gonna, it just makes more sense. And then the pitch, which is like the sap or the resin. So pine, lovely. In some ways similar to cedar, right? They're both conifers. Pine is a little gentler, but again is a really lovely warming remedy. Like it has, energetically is warming, which is really cool. There aren't as many plants that are that way, especially in the north. We don't have very many like spicy plants or, ginger, whatever. So that's great. Has a strong affinity for the respiratory system. A lot of similar indications to cedar. White pine tends to be a little better for, like cedar is maybe more indicated if there's like copious, like damp, like copious damp mucus, like it's freely flowing. White pine has an indication for when it's like hardened and stuck, which can be really frustrating when your body's trying to work through a cough, a cold infection, whatever it is. So yeah, those resins help. They're expectorants, so they help our body expectorate, aka like move up and out mucus, which has waste and all that in it. Let's see, white pine's a really great traditional ingredient in cough syrups. It's really also kind of antispasmodic, so it's going to help if we have a really dry spasmodic cough. It's been used in like whooping cough and things like that. Let's see, respiratory infections. Yeah, chronic bronchitis, lingering infections. All of those things can be really helpful too for if people like their lungs are not, and whatever, there's probably lots of disease categories that would say this, but their lungs aren't like receiving oxygen to their fullest capacity. So there's lots of ways you can see that. They could say, oh, I'm chronically out of breath, or their complexion might be kind of gray. It's kind of called a smoker's complexion, but whatever, kind of grayish, indicates low oxygen. Hypoxia is really what it's called. So again, it's really opening to our lungs and our respiratory system. Tons of ways to kind of work with it in that complex, that system. I would say pretty much, if I was working on the respiratory system, I would want to be ingesting the plant, or doing a steam inhalation is really lovely. Syrup, all of that. So white pine's also, very anti-inflammatory and high in antioxidants, and is a pretty potent cardiovascular and circulatory tonic. So it's good for high blood pressure, arteriosclerosis, kind of coronary heart problems. It just supports the health of the capillaries, of the entire circulatory system. Maybe we have poor circulation, cold hands and feet. I would be taking it internally and then leaning on the external preparation. So again, it's also a traditional herb to kind of take baths with or do rinses. And it's really pain relieving and anti-inflammatory externally. So any again, joint, muscle, connective tissue injury, pain, arthritis, rheumatism, neuralgia, all of that, broken bones, sprains, strains, bruises, anything. Yeah, that's kind of part of its warming stimulant quality, is it's dispersive. So it helps disperse stuck mucus or disperse literally inflammation, pain. It's moving. A lot of the time pain is like in holistic traditions talked about as like stuckness. There's no movement there. So it's pain, it's stuck. It's painful.
How do you connect this the same way you've been doing with like ones that are water boundaries and other things? This is obviously one that's not water, so how do you think about it this way?
I mean, I feel like the energy of the tree, it's really tall, it's really stately, it's like up. There's a lot of energy of like reaching into the air element, like inspiration, inspiring, purifying, like very